Hello. Thank you for having me today. So last summer, I got the opportunity to travel to India and participate in 2 weeks of school building. Before I left, I was excited because you read about this stuff. You see it on TV. You see pictures. But does the information really connect with you until you experience it? When I left Vancouver, I was excited to return a few weeks later, enlightened, with this whole new outlook on life. We worked in a rural village. We got to spend time with the kids, see their school, and experience a bit of their life. One day, we met this family. We sat in their kitchen, which was only a small space in their living area. As they cooked roti over an open fire, smoke filled our lungs, and sweat poured down our faces. It was certainly different from what I'm accustomed to, what we all are. The school was the heart of the community. With a water pump and a garden, it stood out in the brown backdrop of the mountains. Kids ran around before classes in their blue tattered uniforms laughing. They were so lucky to get to go to this school up until grade 5, with only a few rooms and a few teachers. But this is probably no surprise to you. I knew what to expect when I signed up for this trip. When we arrived at the school, there was a small welcoming ceremony, and we got to meet the kids. They were a little timid at first, but by the second visit, it was crazy. We worked the same time that they were in classes, and during the breaks, they'd come out, braid our hair, play hand games, sing songs. They love this one game called Boing, where we throw them up in the air. There was a major language barrier, but without saying a word, we still had fun. These kids loved school. It was something that they felt so privileged to have. Even without a teacher in the class all the time, they were hardworking and determined, because if they could learn to read, write, do basic math, it would open up so many opportunities for them. But then again, I don't need to tell you this. We know that it's a whole new world, but to experience it, I thought that would change me. Well, here's reality. When I returned back to Vancouver a few weeks later, I was a little disappointed. Don't get me wrong, it was an absolutely amazing trip, and I would recommend it to anybody, but I was not changed. At first, I thought I just needed to process it. You know, this was a huge life event after all. I just need to think about it. So I waited, and I thought, and I waited. I waited for this revelation to occur, and as much as I wanted to be enlightened, it just wasn't happening. I was mad at myself because I was wondering, why wasn't I getting this? What was wrong with me? I even asked my mom, do you think I've changed? Maybe it was something that did happen, but I just didn't see it. But she'd always reply, no, not really, and after a few months, I finally gave up and just returned back to my normal life. So now you're probably wondering, why? Why am I telling you all this? Well, here's the thing. When I was approached at my school and asked to do this talk and asked to rethink education, this excites me. I obviously had some pretty clear ideas at first about what I thought a perfect school would be. I envisioned a school where learning was personalized and everyone found value in the curriculum. But then I decided to do a little bit more research. I started talking to people. I talked to my peers, I talked to adults in the community, and I talked to teachers. We talked about technology. We talked about coding computers. We talked about classroom environments, smaller class sizes, testing, personalized learning, values, morals, rights, money, government, equality. And the things I discussed and the stories I heard were endless and interesting. And I found myself staying later and later and later every day after school, because there would be no better feeling than walking away from a conversation feeling like I had gained or contributed some knowledge. So then I sat down to write all of this out. And I realized that in doing so, I'd become this big, giant, confused melting pot of everyone else's ideas. And for me, a 16-year-old girl who's been in high school barely 3 years, to stand up here and tell you how we can fix our education system, well, it didn't really work. So I decided to share my story, some things I learned, and some questions that I still have. I was inspired, enlightened, and had gained so many new outlooks on life and our education system from a simple question. It had me thinking. It had me thinking more than that India trip, which you would have never expected because that India trip was big and expensive and extreme, that this little question would have impacted me more. Anyone could have had a similar experience, but they may not have gotten the same thing out of it. So why is this important to know when rethinking education? Well, first off, because the education system deals with students, people, and making a system for people is not easy. We will never satisfy everyone all the time. As much as we try to put people into boxes and label them a certain way, I think it's hard to find an education system that will work for everyone. We want to make school interesting and inspire everyone, but everyone gets inspired from different things. You could have assumed I would have learned more from a trip overseas than I did from the many conversations at school, but that clicked for me. And I think everyone hopes that students will feel something like this, to do something in school. And we're working so hard to make this environment where we nurture kids to have this love of learning. But that is so hard to do because everyone does not learn in the same way, and everyone is inspired by different things. So by supposedly fixing the education system for many, we have to remember the many. At first, I thought personalized learning was the way to go, but now I'm not 100% sure. When you leave it up to students to try to decide what they want to learn or what they think inspires them, well, I think it's hard for us to know. Things sometimes happen by chance, and if we were never forced to try new things, maybe we would never get the opportunity to realize something that would surprisingly change us in ways that we don't expect. As well, I think it's important that we share knowledge with others in our country, like how our government works, how to read, how to write, how to do math, how to understand our past, our culture, because without this, I think we would have an extremely disconnected society. Personally, I'm a curious person. I like to know how things work. I like to understand. I like to converse. I like to share ideas. I like to talk to people. That is the value of learning in my eyes. However, this is different for everyone. We must remember that the value for some is to get the basic fundamental skills so they can get a job and have a better chance at success and provide for their families. We have to remember that those kids in India having basic math skills, that will open up so many doors. And if we value this instead, we would teach a very different way, and we would learn very different skills. This process has truly led me down the path to more questions. How do we decide what is important? How do we keep education equitable? If we all have our personalized learning plans, how do we ensure that everyone will be able to graduate and get a job? How do we measure the quality of our education? How much money should learning this way cost? As soon as we start putting a price on our education or labeling it a certain way, I think it becomes more of a business than a right. And that brings on a whole new set of problems. So when we are talking about rethinking education, I would like to first ask the question, why do we educate? I'd like you to remember that simple things in the classroom can have huge impacts on students. And as we move forward, I'd also like everyone to remember we need to sustain, share, personalize, and be equitable. Thank you for listening.